In this lecture, I want to begin by talking about the Dutch Republic. Now, this is a group of people that I could spend hours talking about because I find them fascinating. They are not just an innovative people, they are a hardy people, and that's not just because they have a tendency to wear wooden shoes. But to help contextualize the origins of the Dutch, I think it's helpful to begin at the beginning. The Dutch Republic was the United Province of the Netherlands. But before that, they were a dominion of the Spanish crown. They were the Spanish Netherlands. And they, over the course of 80 years, as known as the 80 Years' War, attempted to fight to liberate themselves from Spanish rule. Now, this was a political struggle that very quickly became enmeshed with a religious struggle, namely the conflicts in the aftermath of the Reformation between Catholics and Protestants. In this case, Catholic Spain trying to hold on to a largely Protestant Netherlands. And so this means that the 80 Years' War becomes enmeshed with the 30 Years' War, the long religious wars, the largest and most bloody of the religious wars of Europe, meaning that at the end of the 30 Years' War, by the Treaty of Westphalia, the Netherlands, the Dutch Republic, achieved its independence. Now, all good for the Netherlands, except now that they were independent, they found themselves in a very difficult spot. The problem being is the Netherlands, having a small population, limited land size, was forced to compete with, if you will, the largest naval power in Europe at that time, being England, and the largest land power at that time, which was France. And the problem was the Netherlands had to do both. Being on the continent of Europe, they had to build forts and have an army. And bordering the North Sea, they had to have navies and a fleet. But how could they compete against England? How could they compete against France? And the very interesting thing is the Dutch spend a little over a century not only holding their own, but often succeeding against their competitors. And the question is, how do they manage to do that? Well, they largely succeed through a work of innovation. They create what is known as the Dutch East India Company. It's known as the VOC because it was the Verenigde Oost-Indische Company. This was a private company that was granted a public monopoly. It was given complete control over the trade in the Dutch East Indies. Now, this was no mere company. Don't think of McDonald's or something like this. This was a company that had flags, that had forts, that had military forces, that printed their own money. Imagine having, a military force led by Ronald McDonald controlling your local McDonald's. So this is a very different type of company than one we've talked about before. But beyond being, if you will, almost a state within a state, it was a sophisticated economic creation. Because the Dutch East India Company acquired most of its money through selling stock. People would invest in the company and they would receive a percentage return on the profits through the Dutch trading industry. And what this meant was people started to get very wealthy as well as the company started to gain large amounts of money. Now, because of this, the Dutch Republic became a very wealthy and very powerful shipping nation. Most of our terms for early ships come from the Dutch. They would send back goods from the Dutch East Indies, and some people at the time referred to the Dutch Netherlands as the New Jerusalem. Now, a good way of explaining how wealthy the Dutch were getting is maybe in a way that you've seen before, even though you didn't see it. If you've ever been to an art museum and gone to a Dutch section, you'll find a number of paintings. Now, if you think about paintings of this time period, these were really expensive. You would pay an artist to make a likeness, and thus it was often made of important people, kings, popes, sultans. What's this painting of? What's this painting of? It's of a Dutch family, a merchant family. They're not important. But it is a sign that the wealth created by the Dutch Republic and their trade is enabling the middle class to start to rise, to gain wealth, and be able to, if you will, buy the things that show that they've arrived. Think of this like if someone gets a promotion, the first thing they do is go out and buy a new car. Well, now people are acquiring wealth and they want a painting of themselves. That shows that they've arrived. If you've ever visited an art museum, the Dutch are also famous for still lifes. These are paintings that you might think of as being sort of silly or normal. I made still life paintings, or attempted to, when I was in art class. But think about what still life depictions are. They have china, they have assorted foods. These are paintings that showcase the wealth of the Dutch Republic and of their people. Now, while the Dutch would eventually be deposed out of their global dominance, they were critically important in terms of developing the middle class as well as becoming a land of tolerance and openness. And so the Dutch Republic in many ways provide a unique example of the process of state building along a different line than we've seen before. But in our next lecture, we'll look at one of the major examples of the development of state building, which is England.